Welcome to the Killer Perk tier list. I know you all are dying to put me on the hook for all the controversial opinions you're bound to hear, but let me say a few things first before we begin. First, you may notice some perks are missing here. Don't worry, the rest are merely cloaked in the background. Secondly, I'm only going to spend about 30 seconds or less talking about each perk to keep this video as concise as possible. I invite you to voice your opinions in the comments below about anything I didn't mention. And thirdly, I'll be ranking each perk based on how effectively it accomplishes one or more of the factors shown above the tier list. These are arguably the most important functions a perk can fulfill in a match. If a perk doesn't fit into any of these categories, it's probably a low tier perk, but I'll evaluate them on a case-by-case basis. So with all that being said, let's begin. First up is Hex Huntress Lullaby. This perk has great potential for slowing objective completion times. Repairs, healing, snapping out of it, and more all become harder without any skill check warnings, and survivors suffer greater penalties when missing those skill checks. The catch is that it requires you to hook a few survivors first before any significant challenge is felt by their team. Oftentimes your totem will wind up getting cleansed before you can get enough tokens for the hex to make an impact, so for that reason I'll be putting it in the mid tier. Next we have Bloodhound. This perk guarantees you'll never lose track of a survivor once you've injured them. It also punishes survivors who choose to stay injured rather than heal, since it makes them easier to find. On killers like Nurse, Spirit, and Legion who can lose survivors easily during a chase, Bloodhound is incredibly helpful. However, Bloodhound does nothing to help you find healthy survivors, and most killers have enough movement speed to keep up with survivors and don't need this perk, so I'll be putting it in the mid tier. Up next is Monitor and Abuse. This perk makes it easier for you to land first hits on survivors since it reduces your terror radius by 8 meters, which equals 25% on most killers. It also increases your field of view while out of chases, allowing you to spot survivors more easily. The biggest thing about this perk is how it allows you to get that first hit on a survivor before letting them reach a pallet or window, and the field of view advantage is just icing on the cake. This perk offers both survivor detection and chase time reduction benefits, so I'll be ranking it as a top tier perk. Next is Hex Devour Hope. This perk is terrifying once you get 3 or more stacks, allowing you to instantly down and kill survivors. The problem I have with this perk, however, is similar to Hex Huntress Lullaby. It requires you to hook 2 or more survivors to start getting the benefits, and unless you're playing killers like Hillbilly or Nurse who can end chases quickly, your totem is probably going to get cleansed before you can get use out of it. Because the value you get out of it isn't reliable, I'll be putting it in the mid tier. Next up is Spies from the Shadows. Most survivors don't expect you to be running this perk, so don't consider disturbing crows as giving away their position. This oftentimes allows you to walk straight at them and land a hit without getting into a chase. Also, on some maps like the game and Leary's Memorial Institute, crows seem to be everywhere, allowing you to find survivors very easily with this perk. That being said, the perk does rely on crows, which survivors can just walk past or use the Calm Spirit perk to avoid, so I'll be putting it as a mid-tier perk. Next we have Unnerving Presence. This perk can cause survivors to miss skill checks just by you being around them, helping slow objective completion times. The problem with this perk though is that it requires survivors to be within your terror radius. Some killers have a small terror radius, reducing how effective this perk can be. Also, survivors can just rotate to another generator to avoid the perk's effects. You can also only be in one place at one time, so 3 other survivors could completely ignore this perk. So for these reasons I'll be putting it in the low tier. Up next is No One Escapes Death. This perk single-handedly wins games for you, especially when using it on killers like Wraith, Spirit, Hag, and the Pig, who shine at landing first hits on survivors. The real question is whether it's worth playing most of the match with only 3 perks. Given how commonly used Adrenaline is on survivors, most games they'll only be playing with 3 perks as well, so you won't be at a disadvantage. Due to how often this perk turns the tide of a match, I'll be putting it in the top tier. Next up is Iron Grasp. This perk offers a quality of life improvement while carrying survivors. No annoying struggling to deal with when walking over to the hook. It can also be the difference between getting a basement hook or settling for a lesser hook. But it doesn't really fall into any of the 3 categories I mentioned above, and transporting bodies is a rather small aspect of the game, so while it can be a useful perk, it only shines during niche situations. I'll be putting it in the low tier. Next we have Discordance. This perk greatly improves your objective prioritization by alerting you when survivors are trying to finish a generator quickly. Oftentimes it can be a good idea to break a chase with one survivor to disrupt multiple survivors trying to rush a generator. The more survivors you interrupt at once, the more time you buy yourself to win the game, and Discordance helps you make better decisions about where to patrol to buy yourself the most time. I think it deserves a spot in the high tier. Up next is Spirit Fury. This perk is almost mandatory on killers whose powers don't help in a chase. Instantly breaking a pallet tremendously cuts down your time spent chasing survivors. This perk becomes especially strong when paired with Enduring, basically guaranteeing a hit after being stunned by a pallet. The vast majority of killers can benefit greatly from this perk, so I'll be placing it in the top tier. Next is Unrelenting. This perk increases your recovery time when you miss a swing, which can sometimes make a difference in a chase, but more often than not, if you miss a swing, the survivor will have found a window or pallet to use against you. Missing a swing is pretty difficult in this game as well, as you have the survivor right in front of you, run faster than them, and can lunge for extra range. This perk really isn't necessary to run on any killer except maybe the Spirit, and even then, it becomes less useful the better the player is. It's a low tier perk. Next, we have Hex Ruin. You probably already know where this is going, but let me say this, there's no other perk in the game that will buy you as much time as Hex Ruin. Even if it gets cleansed within the first minute of the game, during that minute there were probably 2 or more survivors making 0 progress on generators trying to find your totem. Ruin also increases the odds you'll run into a survivor since they'll be searching for your totem. Because of the absurd amount of time this perk buys you, I'll be putting it in the top tier. Next is Iron Maiden. This perk reduces the amount of time you spend checking lockers and makes survivors scream and become exposed when exiting lockers. This may sound strong, but the amount of time killers spend checking lockers is pretty small. Also, it only exposes a survivor for 15 seconds, so unless you're a high mobility killer, you probably won't reach the survivor in time to one-shot them. The only killer that makes sense to use this perk on is Huntress, since she reloads her hatches at lockers and it can save her some time. Otherwise, it's a low tier perk. Next up is Overcharge. This perk doubles as a detection and regression perk. It alerts you when a survivor misses a skill check, and adds an additional penalty when they miss that skill check. It really shines on killers with high mobility like Wraith or Hillbilly who can zoom around and break multiple generators quickly. It's also a great pick on the Doctor since skill checks sometimes appear in random places on the screen, making them even harder with Overcharge. It's a useful perk for helping stall out the game, so I'll be putting it in the high tier. Next we have Make Your Choice. This perk is a great pick on killers like Hag, Spirit, and Nurse since they can dash back to the hook and get an easy one-hit kill on a healthy survivor. It's also a potent objective prevention perk since the exposed survivor may not want to risk working on generators until the effect expires. Given how effective this perk can be at reducing chase times, I'll be putting it in the high tier. Next is Predator. I did a comparison video on this perk and found survivor scratch marks became more precise and easier to follow. As useful as that is, it also makes them easier to lose in grassy areas and may prevent scratch marks from appearing on surfaces like walls or trees that would help you spot them from a distance. I could see an argument being made for using Predator on the Spirit, but other than her, I feel like this perk could actually cause you to miss seeing some scratch marks. I'll be putting it in the low tier. Next is Hex the Third Seal. This perk disables survivors' ability to see auras after you hit them. It even disables hooked and down survivors' auras, which makes finding teammates much harder. I think this perk shines when used as part of a slugging build, but there are a lot of survivor perks in the game that counter slugging. Also, Survive with Friends groups can just tell each other where they are, making this perk useless. It also doesn't really fit in any of the categories above, so I'll be putting it in a low tier. Up next is Knockout. This perk is frequently used in slugging builds and hides down survivors' auras from their teammates. However, it's countered by popular perks like Bond and Empathy, and just like Hex the Third Seal, anti-slugging perks in Survive with Friends groups make it useless. It also doesn't fit into any categories above, so it's going in the low tier. Next we have Overwhelming Presence. This perk makes survivors consume their items twice as fast if they're within your terror radius. The issue with this perk is that survivors can just run outside your terror radius and use their items during those moments, making it somewhat useless. And some survivors don't even bring items into the match, making it entirely useless. Also, not all killers have a large terror radius to make this perk effective. This is a low tier perk. Next is Pop Goes the Weasel. This perk is great for helping regress generators. After hooking a survivor, breaking a generator instantly causes a 25% regression penalty. That equals 20 seconds worth of generator progress, which is pretty significant for meeting a condition as simple as hooking a survivor. This perk is great on killers who can get hooks fast, so Hillbilly, Nurse, Myers, and Spirit tend to do well with it. Given how easy it is to activate, and how impactful it is on slowing generator progress, I'll be putting it in the high tier. Next up is Lightborn. This perk makes you nearly immune to getting blinded by flashlights. That's really all this perk does, but it can be worth taking into your games if you see 2 or more survivors with flashlights equipped. However, even if they do bring flashlights, oftentimes you can avoid being blinded just by looking away or facing a wall. Lightborn also doesn't fall into any of the categories above, so I'll be putting it in the low tier. Next we have Play with Your Food. This perk grants a speed boost every time you let your obsession escape a chase. Even with just 1 stack, this perk can allow you to catch up to survivors quickly, and at 3 stacks you'll be moving absurdly fast. The problem with this perk, however, is that you have to find your obsession, which is pretty luck-based. Also, you lose a stack every time you attack, so while this perk is powerful, the condition of having to repeatedly find your obsession and allow them to live is why I'm ranking it as a mid-tier perk. Up next is the Nada Phobia. This perk is a decent alternative to Hex Ruin and helps slow survivor objective completion times. Although it won't buy you as much time as Ruin will, sometimes people forget that this perk also slows all survivor action speeds, which can sometimes be the difference between a survivor healing completely or catching them out. I may have overrated it here, but I think at least some killers can use it as a high tier perk. Next is Sloppy Butcher. This perk is both a detection and objective prevention perk. It increases bleed frequency, making it easier to track survivors, and slows healing speed so survivors have to spend more time off of generators. It's a decent perk on any killer, but truly shines on killers who can land first hits easily. It's quite a popular and powerful perk, only requiring you to injure a survivor to gain its benefits, which you would do anyways in all your games. I think it deserves a spot in the high tier. Next we have Monstrous Shrine. This perk is just way too niche to consider taking into your games. Its effect only applies to basement hooks, and faster sacrifice progression doesn't fall into any of the 3 categories above. Maybe if the effect applied to all hooks it might be worth taking, but in its current state, unless you're a basement-dwelling Leatherface main, you probably won't ever seriously consider using this perk. It's low tier. Next up is Deerstalker. Sometimes when downing one survivor, you'll see a chance to chase another and create more pressure on their team. With Deerstalker, you can go for the chase without worrying about the first survivor crawling away. So while it is a useful perk in these situations, oftentimes you'll just pick up the first survivor immediately and hook them, resulting in the perk seeing very little actual usage. You could argue that it deserves a mid-tier position, but I ranked it as low due to its narrow use case. Next is Insidious. If you were expecting this perk to go in the top tier, I'm going to be disappointing you now. Insidious requires you to stand still to get use out of it, and as a killer, you're going to be running around probably 99% of the game. Unless you can win chases by injuring survivors using telekinesis, Insidious won't do you much good. It also does not fall into any of the categories I mentioned above. So outside of a basement camping build, this perk offers no benefit to you during the majority of your matches. It's low tier. Next we have Hex Haunted Grounds. I like to think of this perk as a miniature no one escapes death. 60 seconds of one-shots usually guarantees you'll get at least one easy down on a survivor, but if you're using a killer like Nurse or Hag, you can sometimes wipe out an entire team just with this one perk. However, you can't choose when it activates, so it's sort of luck-based if the timing is right, but given how impactful this perk is on chase times, I'll be putting it in the high tier. Next up is Whispers. This perk is great during the early game when you have no idea where any survivors are, and during the late game when only a few survivors are left. Whispers always make sure you're patrolling the right areas and can save you a lot of time. During the mid game, however, when all 4 survivors are alive, this perk tends to be lit up all the time, making it useless. It also doesn't help track survivors at all during a chase. I could see it being a mid or high tier perk, but I decided to go with the high tier. Next is Hangman's Trick. This perk was made solely to counter the perk Sabotage, but nobody really uses Sabotage anymore, so the notification aspect of this perk is mostly useless. Hooks respawning after 10 seconds, however, can be useful, but not useful enough to sacrifice a perk slot for. And the bear trap repair timer is also just another sabotage counter, so the use cases of this perk are very narrow. Until sabotage makes a comeback someday, this perk shall remain low tier. Next we have Dark Devotion. This perk has a powerful effect, but requires you to find and hit your obsession in order to activate it. I'm not a fan of obsession perks because they largely depend on luck as to whether you run into your obsession or not during a match. But if you do find your obsession, this perk has a powerful effect of transferring your terror radius to them. I wouldn't pick this perk because it's not as reliable as many other perks that are available, but it is strong when it activates, so I'll put it in the mid tier. Next up is Bitter Murmur. This perk allows you to see the auras of survivors who have just finished repairing a generator. It also allows you to see the auras of all survivors when the last generator is completed. The problem with this perk though is that oftentimes you'll be chasing a survivor when a generator pops, making the information it provides useless to you. The end game aura vision, however, is always useful in prioritizing which survivor you should go after, so I'll rank it as a mid-tier perk. Next is Tinkerer. Having your terror radius silenced for 12 seconds every time a generator is about to be completed is pretty big, especially on dangerous killers like Hillbilly, Nurse, Leatherface, and Myers. The problem with this perk though is that unless you're a high mobility killer, you're not going to make it back to the generator before it pops. The benefit also becomes somewhat useless if you're already chasing a survivor when the perk activates, which happens pretty frequently. On most killers I'd say it's a low tier perk, but it could be ranked higher on the right killers. Up next is Shadowborn. Running this perk will allow you to spot survivors on the edges of your vision, which can help both in and out of chases. Survivors who try to juke or 360 you will also be easier to track, making it less likely for you to lose them in a chase. It's especially helpful on killers like Spirit, Nurse, Wraith, and Myers, whose powers benefit greatly from a wider vision radius. Shadowborn isn't exactly game-breaking, but I do think it's a decent pick on the killers I mentioned, so I'll be putting it in the mid-tier. Next up is Franklin's Demise. This perk can be quite helpful in slowing the game down. When a survivor drops their item, they'll almost always return to the area they dropped it to pick it back up. However, if survivors don't have any items to drop, this perk becomes completely useless. It's really a perk that you decide to equip 60 seconds before the match begins, after seeing if any survivors are bringing items with them. That being the case, I'll be ranking it as a mid-tier perk. Next we have Coulrophobia. This perk was originally created to counter survivors who like to heal up at pallets during chases, but it's not a very common practice anymore since the time to fully heal has been increased since then. Also, this perk is totally reliant on how large your terror radius is, and a lot of killers have a small radius, making it less effective. It's just not a very threatening perk in most cases, so I'll be putting it in a low tier. Next up is Beast of Prey. This perk hides your red stain after being in a chase for 15 seconds. This is pretty powerful since it makes you less predictable to the survivor and allows for more mind games. However, taking 15 seconds or more to land a single hit on a survivor is usually too long, and you're probably going to wind up losing the match if you have to rely on bloodlust every chase. The more skilled you become as a killer, the less this perk will be necessary for you, so I'll be putting it in the low tier. Next is Territorial Imperative. This perk is a decent detection perk, but its use case is very niche. It only activates when a survivor enters the basement, and only if you're 32 meters or more away. If you have a survivor hooked in the basement, this perk could allow you to patrol other areas of the map without worrying as much, but depending on how far away you are and whether you're in a chase or not, you might not get to do much with that information it gives you. I'll be putting this in the low tier. Next we have Save the Best for Last. This perk reduces your successful attack cooldown by up to 40%, which is quite powerful. This significantly reduces your chase times with survivors and allows you to perform other actions more quickly after attacking, such as teleporting to a trap with the Hag or cloaking with the Wraith. You do have to build stacks to get the cooldown bonus, but on first hit killers it's pretty easy. Given how impactful this perk is during chases, I think it deserves a spot in the top tier. Next in line is Fire Up. This is more of a late game perk as it increases your action speeds by 4% for every generator that gets completed. It's not the best pick on most killers, but killers like Freddy, the Pig, and the Doctor can get the most out of it since they're good at stalling out the game. Ideally, you want to freeze the game when only one generator is left to gain 16% faster action speed, and the killers I mentioned are usually good at that. I think on most killers this is a low tier perk, but the ones I mentioned earlier could turn it into a mid tier perk. Next is Corrupt Intervention. This perk forces survivors to repair generators closer to you at the start of the game, making it easier to find them. If you're running a killer like Hag or Trapper, Corrupt Intervention makes it more likely that survivors will trigger your traps since they'll be in a tighter area. If you're playing Doctor or Legion, survivors will be more likely to be grouped together, increasing how effective their powers are. I think this perk synergizes with a lot of killers and helps with both managing generator completion time and finding survivors, so I'll be putting it in the high tier. Up next is Barbecue and Chili. This is probably the most popular killer perk in the game because, well, who doesn't like extra blood points to buy overpowered add-ons? But the 4 seconds of wall hacks it offers after each hook is powerful too. Every killer can benefit from knowing which direction to go after each hook, and this perk makes it easy to start snowballing with killers like Nurse and Hillbilly. Given how strong this perk is when it comes to survivor detection and prioritization, I'll be ranking it as a top tier perk. Next up is Surveillance. Some players prefer Overcharge over Surveillance because of the potential generator regression it offers, but the real reason to take Surveillance is that it doesn't let the survivor know that you know they're working on the generator. This is very powerful on stealthy killers as it practically guarantees a free hit since you can sneak up on them. That being said, the information this perk gives you won't do much if you're busy in a chase or hooking a survivor. I'll put it in the mid tier for most killers, but it could be high tier for stealthy killers. Next is Mad Grit. This perk has a very narrow use case, but it basically guarantees that players who try to body block you while carrying down survivors never succeed. Body blocking tactics tend to happen more often in high rank matches, but even in those, survivors are going to be busy on generators most of the game. Oftentimes, this perk won't see any use in your matches, and it doesn't fit into any of the categories I mentioned above, so it's a low tier perk. Next we have Hex Thrill of the Hunt. This perk can help you protect some of the most powerful perks in the game like Hex Ruin and Devour Hope. It's useful on pretty much any killer, but high mobility killers like Hillbilly, Nurse, and Spirit tend to get the most out of it since they can usually make it back to the totem before the survivor finishes cleansing it. What's most powerful about this perk though, just like all Hex perks, is that it forces survivors to focus on something other than doing generators, which buys you more time to win the game. I think this perk deserves a spot in the high tier. Up next is Infectious Fright. After downing a survivor, other survivors within your terror radius reveal their positions to you. That sounds powerful, and it used to be, but this perk got nerfed to where it no longer reveals survivor auras. They just appear as scream notifications, which aren't nearly as reliable. Also, like all terror radius perks, how effective it is depends on how large your killer's radius is. I probably should have ranked this as a low tier perk, but it's mid tier because I only learned about the nerf later on. Next we have Remember Me. With this perk, as long as you hit your obsession enough times before the exit gates are powered, you'll add up to 30 seconds to the exit gate timer, which can feel like an eternity for survivors. However, this means that you'll be playing the entire match with only 3 perks, and unlike No One Escapes Death, this perk isn't going to help shorten your chase times. This is best used on killers whose powers become more dangerous as the game goes on, so Myers, Pig, and Freddy come to mind. I think it's a powerful perk, but works best on just a few killers, so I'll put it in the mid tier. Up next is Enduring. This perk is almost mandatory on killers whose powers don't help in a chase. It saves a tremendous amount of time to be able to swing through every pallet rather than having the survivor stun you or run you for another loop. It also counters Decisive Strike and head-on stuns, and pairs well with Spirit Fury. There's really no downside to this perk, and it works well on the majority of killers. It's worth its spot in the top tier. Next is Brutal Strength. This perk speeds up your pallet and generator breaking times. This can have an impact on chase times, but nowhere near as large an impact as Enduring or Spirit Fury, which allow you to completely ignore pallets sometimes. It's an okay perk for helping end chases faster though, and breaking generators faster speeds up patrol times too, so I'll stick it in the mid tier. Next we have Bamboozled. This perk can completely shut down notorious loops like the buildings on the ironworks and asylum maps. It also lets you vault faster, which helps reduce chase times. On killers whose powers don't help much in a chase, this perk is a huge time saver. It forces the survivor to find another loop or risk taking a hit most of the time. Given the massive impact this can have on reducing chase time, I'll be putting it in the top tier. Next up is Strider. This perk allows you to hear injured survivors from a mile away. It also makes survivors want to heal as soon as possible because they can also hear how loud their grunts of pain are. The only problem with this perk is how the popular perk Iron Will completely counters it. But other than that, running this perk on killers like Nurse Spirit or Legion will make finding injured survivors a breeze. I'll be putting it in the high tier. Next is Rancor. This perk reveals the locations of all survivors for 3 seconds after a generator is completed. That sounds strong, but the reveal is only a notification bubble, not an aura reveal, which makes it less reliable. The real reason people take this perk is to instantly down and kill the obsession at the end of a match. But the obsession can see your aura after each generator is completed, allowing her to evade you. So it isn't really reliable enough in either the detection or chase time reduction categories for me to rank it any higher than low tier. Next we have Dying Light. This perk applies a massive debuff to the survivor team if you manage to kill your obsession. Sometimes this is easy, other times it's not. More often than not though, it's a bad idea given how many perks and items are available to save survivors' lives. Still, it's not impossible, and the payoff is pretty big if you manage it, so I'll put it in the mid tier. Next up is Agitation. This perk has only one purpose, and that's to transport down survivors to hooks quickly. Aside from enabling you to land the occasional basement hook, this perk doesn't really do much to help you win your game. It also doesn't fall into any of the 3 categories I mentioned above, so I'll be putting it in the low tier. Next is Distressing. This perk blows up your terror radius, making it easier for survivors to detect your presence. Most of the time this is a bad idea as it gives them more time to react, but on certain killers or combined with certain perks it can be a smart idea. Doctor's Static Field, for example, works off his terror radius, so the larger it is, the more madness survivors will accumulate. Other than narrow uses like this though, it's mostly a handicap, so it's going in the low tier. Up next is Nurse's Calling. This perk is so powerful, most survivors assume that you're running it and go out of their way to heal in safer locations. Seeing auras of survivors who are healing is a huge advantage because catching them out during these moments both completely wastes all the time they spent healing and skips having to chase them. It's a great perk on almost any killer, but stealthy killers will especially benefit from using it, as survivors won't know they're coming until it's too late. This is without a doubt a top tier perk. And finally, we have Warden. This is a powerful perk if you can get it to activate. The problem with it though is that you have to hook a survivor after the gates are powered. Sometimes the gates will be just moments away from being powered and you'll hook the survivor but find your perk doesn't activate. Timing is key with this perk, and it can help to leave a survivor down for maybe 15 seconds before hooking them so the survivor team can power the gates first. Warden can definitely change the outcome of a match, but its strict condition is why I'm dropping it in the mid tier. So that's the tier list for you. If you stuck with me through the whole video, you're awesome. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe for future content.